You're listening to episode 733 of a Very Spatial podcast, March 10th, 2024.
Wishing upon satellites, 'cause my shooting stars don't arrive on time. Wide awake in the dead of night.
Hello and welcome to a Very Spatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week, there are a lot of things to talk about, but to bring Frank's loves together, he will begin by talking about, or is this Barb's?
I put it up there, but if Frank knows about it, he can
Well,
do it.
no.
All right.
Barb has an equal love of games to Frank. I just had assumed. I apologize. Especially right after International Women's Day. And now I'm cutting you off. It's making it even worse. Please.
So NASA has released a tabletop adventure that is about the Hubble telescope getting stolen by aliens. And I actually had to check this a few times to make sure this was in fact true. This wasn't just someone writing fanfic about NASA or thinking, wouldn't it be cool if NASA did this? NASA has actually released a tabletop adventure officially featuring the Hubble telescope. So I think that all of us here, should be excited, and I think we should play.
The Lost Universe.
Yeah, it's actually system agnostic, even though it keeps referencing D&D, which would suggest not system agnostic. Sorry, gaming nerd pedanticism kicking in. It's an unusual story. A dragon kidnapped a bunch of alien wizards and forced them to rip the Hubble telescope out of our reality. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on there. One, a dragon kidnapped a bunch of alien wizards. Normally
kind of backwards.
Normally dragons are the bad guy or aliens are the bad guy. But now apparently the aliens aren't the bad guy. They're just, slave labor. I don't know what. It's just kind of a weird setup.
Well, and the question is it, I assume it's also an alien dragon.
Yeah, it's a space dragon.
Yeah.
Okay, space dragon. So, and then it's ripping the Hubble telescope out of our reality. So we're talking about multidimensionality right there out of the gate. I'm just saying there's a lot going on here, and I'm intrigued, and I'm going to play it. Yeah. I love this. The adventure depicts a group of faintly baffled researchers. Now let's back up a second. Let's review here. Space dragon, kidnapped alien wizards, multidimensionality, and they're faintly baffled.
But they know about the wonders of the universe and that anything is possible. So they're only faintly baffled that they haven't figured it out.
They're rolling with it.
Yeah.
And they're out of the Goddard Space Flight Center, which is in Greenbelt, Maryland. So apparently everybody in Houston and Florida either don't know or like, yeah, that happens. I mean, it's just, what's the story here?
It's a party of 4 to 7 levels, 7 to 10 characters. So fairly large.
So head over to the science.nasa.gov page that's in the show notes and download it.
Yes, it's all available online and free.
I guess continuing with the somewhat space theme.
Space adjacent.
Yeah. MethaneSat has been launched. MethaneSat is as you might imagine, a satellite that is measuring methane. It's actually a New Zealand project supported by the New Zealand Space Agency and developed by the nonprofit Environmental Defense Fund. So it's there. It's measuring. It is going to be, I think, really interesting because the data is going to be available from their website. So again, just launched, so it's not completely onboarded yet. So data is not available. They do have some of the preliminary data that they captured in atmosphere by a plane while they're testing everything. So if you want to go and get a look at what the data is going to look like, you can head over to the website. But right now we're still waiting for the first data sets from the satellite to be uploaded to their website.
I think it's important to note that while other satellites actually can measure, or other sources can measure methane, what this is looking for is emitters, so sources of methane. And because its orbit is 15 orbits per day, it can actually look at change across the course of a day. So I think that it's on a resolution that is not been there before. And so, of course, when you're trying to figure out potentially how to mitigate methane release, this could be really, really useful in taking a look at, where the emissions are coming from, how they're changing, and maybe what can be done to reduce them.
I was just going to say, it's one, I was surprised it wasn't out of Sky Truth. And the second one is, like Sue said, I think because it can detect small leaks, it's going to be really good about response time to things. which will be very good and important.
I think methane is one of those gases that whenever I teach this in any sort of like physical geography class or anything like that, intro class, the students are always surprised that that's something to be worried about, that it's something to think about in terms of greenhouse gases. And, obviously there's no way to avoid it. Cow farts are how everyone seems to think about methane, but there are a lot of other important sources of methane leaks that people just don't realize.
But to be fair, the animals are a major.
I'm not saying I wasn't commenting on this article because all I could think about was, I wonder if it's good enough to detect where all the animals are at.
It should be, yeah. I mean, whenever you're talking about a field of dense, I mean, if you have, spread out, but, a dense cluster.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. So I'm wondering if you could actually use this data to track animals across, planet.
Or in a move for cow propaganda, perhaps disprove that that it's not as much as we thought.
It's just one of those weird auxiliary things that popped in my head. It was like, I wonder if you could track a herd of giraffe from methane using this satellite.
Yeah, because it depends on what the base value is.
Yeah, I mean, you could track any wildlife, right? I mean, well, not any. I have to imagine a herd of bunnies, for example, would not show up on the satellite.
It has to be, and it has to be something that's, I just forgot what cows are called. Ruminants?
Yes, ruminant.
So something that is, developing that gas in their stomach or stomachs.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, this is an area I know nothing about. But anyway, that was what I was thinking about. I was thinking about animal farts and could you track things that way for good or bad?
I guess my linking thing is tracking things this time.
Oh, and your choices of news items
of linking. Yeah, well, I mean, it was space, but yeah. So the NGA has a couple of news items this week that I wanted to pull out. The first one is they are significantly increasing their focus on commercial satellite data with a new Luno program. This does follow on the existing commercial satellite data acquisition program that's been going on for years. But this program is looking at spending $290 million versus the previous program, which was $29 million over 5 years. So, yeah, I mean, we're talking about something that is a fairly substantial change. And, I'm teaching geo this semester, so a lot of what I've been talking about in a couple of the classes is just the sheer shift in focus in some areas to the commercial industry and taking advantage of commercial data, because we have lots and lots of commercial satellite systems up there now compared to 5 years ago, especially compared to 20 years ago. Just the sheer volume of satellites. We're not just talking about GeoEye versus Digital Globe versus, I just forgot France's, because it's been bought so many times. I forgot.
You mean Spot?
Spot, yes,
Yeah.
Spot Image. Whenever we were talking the late 90s, early 2000s, they were the only commercial vendors. Now we have so many, from, full-blown traditional satellites to multiple CubeSats, swarm type things. So yeah, we have a lot out there. So it's, I think, a different environment than we were in before to take advantage of. Well,
yeah, and in terms of investment in new technology adoption, commercial entities are much more nimble and can put money at it and get things launched. So they can always be updating their products faster than a lot of government systems can do that.
And this is still an augmentation to what they already use in-house. It's just, like you said, an investment in commercial satellite imagery, and that those contracts will be coming out, and they're looking for things like shipping, construction, energy infrastructure, a lot of support for Earth observation.
I think this is in somewhat reminiscent for me of the sort of GIS and society debate stuff, where there was a lot of conversation about GIS being government top down. And it was because of the expense of it, for the most part, that GIS was expensive, computers were expensive, all that sort of stuff. And as it became more broad, that became less of a pressing, I'm going to put myself out there and say less of a pressing problem, I think, than it would have been 30 years ago or something like that. I kind of feel like the intelligence industry, apparatus. That's probably, I was kind of thinking of something, not apparatus. The intelligence apparatus has expanded, or is expanding a little bit behind the scope because of the expense of satellites, of getting that stuff out there, and any other remote sensing sort of things. But I mean, there's a lot of this technology that is now more broadly available. I was going to use the word democratized, but I'm not sure if that's true. But it's a little more broadly available, and then they can start picking out these pieces and making it a little more cost effective, more spread out. I'm not sure what I'm going for here, but it just reminds me of the GIS and society sort of basis of debate, how that's changing even at this technological scale.
Well, I think the interesting thing at the end of kind of one of the articles that we were looking at is the notation that sources have said that NGA envisions using Luno to kind of modify their business model a little bit. So rather than hire contractors, so the analysis of the data they get from various sources, right, goes on in facilities that they, manage through contractors. They're talking about NGA buying analysis as a service. And so that's interesting, right? It might be more efficient, you say, right? But I think it brings up one of the classic debates, right, of the geospatial world and data and all those things, right? Is that data is collected when there's a reason to collect it, and you collect the data that is for that reason. And so that's interesting in that if you move to a model where you're just getting the product from somebody, if they're a commercial entity, and there's a lot of data out there that maybe would be nice to have, but it's not going to be commercially viable for them to collect it. I mean, I think it's interesting who will then drive sort of what analysis is being done. So not just data is collected, but also then what analysis is done on that. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that goes, I know Frank mentioned the GIS and society debates, but I also know that there was that shift in the federal government when they did shift from federal worker, employees to contractors. And that was a big thing. And there were a lot of debates about it. And I feel like this is going to bring up another debate. You're moving from contractors, which have, still a lot of discussions about using contractors versus using federal employees, like Sue said, that have a direct link to the data and the analysis that you're doing, to now this service driven.
And, not only that, but they're not going to have a customer of one or two, right? So it's not just going to be for the NGA or any other the 3-letter agencies. They're going to need other customers to stay in business. So the question becomes, how is this information going to be used, and how is this analysis going to be used in such a way that, provides adequate information to the intelligence agencies, but does not provide the same degree of information to the other customers?
Well, and there's a lot here that, NGA we think of as intelligence, but not everything that they touch is secret, top secret, etc. Some of it's just data, because data is data. And so, doing things like agricultural forecasts or current natural hazards response or those type of things through imagery is something that I can see being part of the analysis as a service. I mean, we're already doing that to some extent. Whenever you look at what Maxar is doing or Airbus is doing in terms of their value-added products on top of their imagery that they're already collecting. So it's just between, the big names who will definitely get part of this, but also some of the startups that are doing really interesting things with not the generative AI, but the traditional remote sensing AI that we've been using for decades in terms of classification and things like that, but things that are getting better through deep learning and those type of machine learning algorithms and approaches as we get better and better training sets and larger training sets as we keep creating.
Yeah, you're not wrong that a lot of the information that they're making intelligence decisions or inferences about are just open source stuff or easily accessible stuff that just, if it's going to rain tomorrow and this, that, and the other thing, you can infer some things. So, but it would be interesting I'm wondering if it makes it easier for counterintelligence to infer. Anyway, I'm probably teasing at things that somebody much smarter than me has figured out already, but I do have concerns about that. Is that if it's a commercial product, who else are they selling to, and to what degree?
Everybody. Sell it to everybody. It's a commercial product.
Yeah.
But you also have the fact that you use the term open source, which you have to be careful, because open source in Intel is not the same thing as open source for us. Because open source for Intel is things like radio and TV. These are things I have to keep in mind this semester in this 1 hour, what I can and can't say in a certain way.
Right. Well, I get that. But related, the NGA has also launched a new National GeoInt Operations Center, which is going to be, I'm trying to think, it doesn't say where it's located at, which is not a big surprise, but it's a 24/7 operations center that's going to provide geospatial intelligence to the nation's policymakers. Now, this is one of those things that I think is great. And also, you didn't have one already, if I'm honest.
Well, actually, they kind of note that they did have it. So, but it's different now.
Yeah.
Newer
it's
and
why-
cooler.
I was like, don't we have this?
Yeah. That's what I'm assuming. Newer
The
and
original
cooler.
one, the one that's been around since NEMA's days, the pre-NGA NEMA, was basically to watch and see what's going on. This new one, quote, delivers distinct visual products and geospatial information to military and national level decision makers. So, yeah. So it's now they're there to be on call, not just to find that things are happening and look at things, but to provide content for briefings and things like that. So
Map.
it's
to make a map.
information. Yeah, it's the
Fire out
mapping
the story
center.
maps.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so many things to say about that.
Well, this is interesting. I wonder what degree NGA employs. I know they have a lot of cartographers because they have to make maps very quickly and they have to make, as accurately and clear as possible. But I'm wondering how many infographic specialists and stuff like that they also use. I would imagine that would be a increasingly demanded product to go alongside of, or maybe in place of, a map.
And I will tell you right now, there is a document somewhere that tells you exactly how you have to convey it in these infographics, because the amount of specificity there is about mapping in various documents through NGA and others for intel purposes is just amazing. This is the symbol you will use for this every time that you're creating this type of map.
I know somebody that used to do this for a living and they used ArcMap. And so a big chunk of what they told me they did was automated for the most part. So a lot of that stuff is just, you didn't have a choice. It was like, oh, that's this. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and put that symbol in there for you.
Yep.
So no avoiding any of that. You couldn't get that creative with it whatsoever, but you still found ways to be, I was told that they found ways to be somewhat creative within the constraints of clarity.
Yeah. And, clarity is important, especially whenever something is going on as quickly as some of these things do. So not having the choice sometimes helps you get to the story faster.
Yeah, and it was noted that, part of what they're doing is increasing interoperability by bringing the functions together, which makes sense. There's a shorter space between those functions.
So the question is, it's the National Geo Operations Center, the NGOC. Is that how you say it? NGOC?
I like NGOC.
There's a non-zero chance that people are just going to call it NGOC.
But they own the night. That's what their motto was, apparently, at the end. They own the night.
I like that, but I was trying to figure out where I'd heard it before somewhere.
Because the night belongs to lovers.
Stop it, because it was already in my head. So stop it.
And so we head to our last news item of the week, and that is the recent release of the National States Geographic Information Council, who release their every other year geospatial maturity assessment. And we did talk about various things around this last time it came out. So I figured we should talk about it again. Now, curiously, there is one state that we're all very familiar with on the podcast that's not on there.
Yeah, that's because the reason for that, and I'm kind of curious, eyeballing it, looks like to me there's what?
I think it's 4 or 5
states or so that aren't there.
I think it was 5, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it. So you've got the states that aren't there are New Hampshire, Georgia, South Dakota, Nevada, and West Virginia. And I can only speak for West Virginia. We know exactly what happened there. GIS state coordinator retires. Letter gets sent by NSGIC to the state coordinator. Everyone is letting his mail pile up wherever the heck it piles up. Takes a few weeks, months, I think it was months, for the new coordinator to get interviewed and hired and get on board and all that sort of stuff like that. Goes through looking through the mail and says, oh, they were asking for this X number of weeks or months ago. Too late now. So, that was just one of those weird timing, unfortunate timing things where the natural person and group to do it wasn't there in place within the state. I'm curious if anything like that happened in any of the other states, or if they just consciously didn't take part, or they didn't know who to send it to.
Any of those are possible. There's different things to talk about. The grade range is one that it ranged from A's to D's, and there was one A, multiple A minuses. There was one D, No C minuses, just jump straight to C. Oh, wait, no. There are no C's, just C pluses and C minuses. But most states were between A and B minus. And that kind of tracks. I think it's a little inflated, kind of like my grades in my classes are, because it's one of those that if you turned in the homework, you got part of the grade. So, it is probably a little inflated from where we really should think about what we're looking at for maturity. But I don't know, what are some of the things we want to talk about in terms of either details, methods, things they look at, or the general grades?
I was going to say what's interesting is what they've added for this report versus, what was in it the last time, and then what's not being graded but is in there. So hydrography is in there, but it's not being graded because of the new USGS initiative. So, I think that's interesting. They do have a dashboard, so you can download the report or you can use the dashboard to look at information, and they have all the different areas that are covered in the grading system.
And you can also go to report card. So the report card has state-led themes of address, cadastre. There we go. Cadastral data. There we go. That makes me happier. Elevation, orthoimagery leave off, transportation, next generation 911, then the federal led themes of geodetic control, government units, and orthoimagery leaf on. So, of course, leaf on is part of the FSA, Farm Service Agency / USDA data collection. So every state should have access to orthoimagery on, but there's a kind of side note on that one for, what was it, Arizona?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, how much leaf do they have? But it's kind of interesting because really what they're grading on is how much it is available to the, out there. And I'm assuming that's by the state, which seems a little weird to me. I know West Virginia does publish the NAPE imagery, but I think isn't it available on data.gov or someplace like that also, or
Yeah.
You can just download it from there directly. So it was a little unusual to me that they actually graded that at all.
Well, that's a big part of what their mission is, having worked with this data before in a report, that, it is to make sure that it's there and accessible and usable by the groups in the state and states and regions that need it.
Oh, I forgot there was another section of coordination that was by itself.
Yeah, so I mean, big chunk of this is data availability, but I do like that they look at things like coordination, at how you're working as a unit within the state, which is interesting. Something I thought was fascinating is that 23 states have a GIO, which is a relatively I don't think I've run into many GIOs in my wanderings about, which would be Geographic Information Officer.
Well, I mean, I think overall, like certain states, obviously have some way to go with a lot of these things, but I think that overall that trend, right, increasing recognition of the importance of it and the real effort and dedication, as several of the states gave responses to their grades. And, one of the things he talked about in some of those where it said, well, you're talking about scarce resources in a lot of cases, but resources are being dedicated to geospatial data and, keeping it up to date and expanding what you don't have and stuff. So I think that that's a positive. And so I think that the majority of states getting pretty decent grades is evidence that we're making strides.
Yeah, I mean, if we compare it to the year 2000, where we had maybe a quarter of the states had GIS at this kind of level, it's very different.
Yeah, they're talking, especially with the NG 911, that there were only 4 states that reported no funding, which is down from 10 2 years ago. So I think that, while there are still challenges, that, that awareness is growing. And I think that the NSGIC report is a great tool to raise awareness. It's something where there aren't really, any bad grades. They explain how sometimes the grading, there are factors beyond your control, but they're a good thing to use to show what you've achieved in your state, to talk about it and to show, here's what's going on. It's almost like a third-party endorsement, a federal endorsement of all the efforts that are being made in the geospatial community in the states.
I think that's true. And to recognize still, some challenges. I mean, and when you look at these data sets, all of them are complex, expensive, right? Rapid. And some places, especially states that, are seeing a lot of development and a lot of change, right? They're also data sets that have to be frequently updated in order to truly be useful. And that's expensive to do. So the fact that as many states can, I was surprised in the state-led themes, for example, of elevation. I was surprised that a lot of states actually did pretty good on that, as an example.
It's weird because, with the 3DEP POP program, you kind of expect, so I was surprised that wasn't under federal-led themes, but a lot of the data is coming from the state level, and those states at the coast get a lot more support because of NOAA and the LIDAR process compared to some of the interior states, but, there's a lot of other work that goes on in those areas that hopefully help support them in their acquisition.
Well, I think that there's some confusion in the way this report presents some of this information. I really think there should be part of this is what state efforts exist as distinctly separate from the federal efforts. And the reason I say that is because I feel like with a lot of these base level, these framework layers like elevation, like leaf on imagery, all that sort of stuff, I kind of feel like that it would highlight fairly quickly to states and to the federal government how critical federal funding and federal efforts on these data layers are to it even existing at all. And that's somewhat implicit in all of these, but I really wish it would be more explicit to say, okay, let's grade this as a state level endeavor as opposed to a federal state partnership. And I'm wondering how these scores would change if we did that. Well, I mean, elevation is a great example, right? Absent 3DEP, how many states would have elevation at a level, no pun intended, at a level that, you would consider acceptable, I guess would be the term I would use.
South Carolina on how can we be an F for a federal-led theme? Never mind. For elevation data, we get an A-, but so much of that is dependent on NOAA's coastal program, which, has been used to basically collect the state in many ways. So there you have that example of it's a state-led theme, but it is completely on the back of a lot of data that's coming from, other resources.
And there's nuances here that make it hard to get that ABC stuff that I think is important. So let's look at South Carolina again on elevation. The question is, please describe in numbers and scope how the GIS community and others in your state have leveraged LIDAR elevation data in support of a variety of disciplines. The answer given was a LIDAR bill was passed, however, it is unfunded legislation. While we have business needs for statewide elevation data, the most recent was 2.3 state collected in 2020 at QL2. So that unfunded legislation is how do you grade that? You've got legislation, but there's no money behind it. So is it useful at all to even have the legislation at that level or at all?
Well, I think in some ways when I read the NSGIC report, I think of it as it's being peer reviewed, peer graded. But I mean, peer grading, it's people that know what you do, that they're going through and evaluating. And you see that sometimes in their, responses and evaluation. And one of these is, for transportation, that they did acknowledge that one of the reasons why transportation grades have gone down is actually that the questions they're asking are more nuanced and harder. Their expectations are more since the past two other times grading cycles. So I thought you do have to read the fine print to see how these scores are being done to get a better idea of than just looking at the grade itself. Because I think it sometimes tells you what's going on in your state more than just, did we do good? No, if there's a problem, why is it there?
Well, I agree. And to follow up with that too, it also reflects the change, right? So the standard moves forward as, you reach maturity, right? The expectation that you're going to be at a certain level, that level is going to get higher every time it's time to, do an assessment. So those who are behind potentially could fall further behind. And if you just kind of rest on your, you did really well like for a while and got a bunch of stuff done, but if you don't keep up, then now you yourself are going to fall behind too. So updating kind of the standards and the questions, I think, is actually a good thing because it reflects where we're going, like what's that, expectation, right? And the expectation for transportation, right? To get the highest grade, you had to have, I think, 100% of your street center lines or something like that. But that's it. Those are data sets that have been around for a long time, and that's kind of an expectation. Unless and some states pointed out, we have unique conditions where we might have different jurisdictions or things like that going on. But that's also a way to say, right, this is now the standard. So yes, maybe it's different, but again, I think that's actually a good thing.
So I'm going to talk about the elections one, considering in the United States, we have a huge election that's coming up in November. There's some interesting, to my mind, they appear to be contradictions on the surface of it. So broadly speaking, what it says is that 32 of the 46 states or 47 states answered no to the question, does your office have a formal relationship with your state elections director? And they have defined what they mean by formal relationship. And it's just, administrative rule, statute, whatever it may be, formal agreement of services. So the majority of them don't have a formal relationship with your elections. And if you're unfamiliar with elections, it is incredibly geographic and geospatial in nature, because it comes from usually precinct boundaries, or usually the atomic unit. Well, arguably census boundaries, but certainly starting with precincts, and it sort of bubbles itself up to who gets to vote where, and it's how you make your legislative districts, and that has everything to do with who represents you in that particular district, as we all know with the modified area unit problem, gerrymandering, all that sort of stuff like that. So it's interesting that the overwhelming majority of, state coordinators and state GIOs don't have a formal relationship with their state election director. However, whenever you go to the precincts boundaries tab, I'm looking at the dashboard, by the way, that's how I'm looking at this stuff. The question is, does your state manage or have easy access to accurate current statewide voting precinct boundary layer? And almost half said yes. So that says to me that either A, the layer is being produced by maybe a third party, or it's, housed at the state elections, but they don't really necessarily know anything about it. Or B, they've got their own geospatial person in-house that is doing something similar, but there's no formal relationship there, which seems really, I was going to say weird, but maybe it's not weird. It seems really unproductive, or I think it would be a stronger election system if they were more tightly related, maybe not coupled, but related. I wanted to raise it because I wanted to highlight that as a really interesting example of how you can tear into this report and start seeing a little more nuances if you start looking at the individual details, even, in looking, for example, at elections. So there's a lot of great stuff here is what I'm trying to say.
So Frank noted that he was using the dashboard. If you go to the report, there's a little button. There's actually a very nicely done mapping dashboard of the results of the report, where you can see all the different themes. And there's a couple of them where I wished in the sub-tabs that they would have kind of done individual questions, but that's a minor thing. But anyway, you can actually go, instead of just looking at the text of the report, you can actually see it mapped out in a nice little dashboard. So I just wanted to make a note of that. And the link is in the summary page in the show notes. You'll find a button that just says go to the dashboard.
And I really like the NGA credo, which is build once, share often. And I think that's a lot of what you see, going on. And this is the third report that, the states are working towards that, which is very commendable. It's a lot's being done. As we said, this is a maturity assessment, and it really does show the geospatial, maturity that's going on in states. We often talk about the maturity in industry, but this is the maturity within state level government.
Though once again, I would like to highlight that more details for anyone in district listening would be really amazing. So I'm looking at the addresses, and the question is, does your state have a program for developing or maintaining an authoritative statewide address database? And overwhelming said yes, which is great. But I happen to know in one state that's not in the survey that it exists. So you could say yes, but I wouldn't necessarily. The inference from that is that it's a very widely accessible, easy process. And so I kind of feel like a little more devil in the details would be awfully nice.
And so if you're interested in how your state or any state did in NGIC's geospatial maturity assessment for 2023, as we wait for the next one in 2025, head over to the link in the show notes. On to the events corner. As always, we encourage you to check out these events and others in your neighborhood.
or far away if you like traveling. But first up is the Geospatial World Forum, which will be May 13th through the 16th in lovely Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
June 11th through the 14th in Las Vegas, you can go to the ISPRS Technical Commission 2 Symposium.
Focused on photogrammetry.
So NACIS is taking place October 16th through 19th in Tacoma.
Washington.
The North American Cartographic Information Society. Of course, if you'd like us to add your event to the podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at barb@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com, or you can follow me on all the social medias at Nojapar, except for that one that I don't go to anymore.
And I'm available at Kinda Spatial. And of course, if you'd like to find any of our contact information, head over to veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always,
We're the folks from VerySpatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Wishing upon satellites, 'cause my shooting stars don't arrive on time. Wide awake in the dead of night, I've been looking for all the reasons why I feel so lost. I get so lost. Show me the way home. I can't go the way I know. I've been looking for a light. Show me the way home. Show me the way home. Show me the way.
Try my best to walk the line, but my memories just don't memorize. Blame it on a bad design. I play along, still sometimes I feel so lost. I get so lost.
Show me the way home. I can't go the way I know. I've been looking for a light. Show me the way home. Show me the way home. Show me the way.
Tell me I'm not lost, I'm just wandering. Been counting up